Bienvenidos and welcome to Mija on the Mic, where Mija, interviews daughters of immigrants who are making moves in their industries around the world. Today, I'm excited to invite award-winning podcast host of Masala Podcast and founder of South Asian Feminist Podcast Network, Soul Sutras, Sangeeta Pillai. I'm so excited to have her here today. There's so much to talk about. Thank you for joining us.
It's such a pleasure, Laurie. I think when I bumped into you a couple of weeks ago or a month ago, I felt like there was such a connection and we're such kindred spirits. We're operating in these two different cultures and we're talking about migration and daughters and women. And it feels like such a, I think it's my Asian kind of belief system, but I feel like these things are meant to be. And I think we were meant to meet
Yeah,
for a
yeah, definitely. I was so
purpose.
excited to chat with you. And having already been a fan of your show when I was first starting out as a podcaster and as a Latina creator, I was always looking for creators like myself who were talking about their communities. And
Yes.
so when I found your show, I was like, wow, this is what we need, right?
Oh,
And it was great because even though you're in the UK and I grew up in the US, I noticed so many similarities in our
yes.
experiences. So
Yes.
thank you for making that show and for teaching folks both inside and outside your community about your experience. And so, for those of you who don't know Sangeeta, I would love for you to share a little bit about your cultural history. Tell our listeners about your family
Yeah.
background and maybe a
Yeah.
little bit about your relationship with your culture personally.
Yeah. So I am South Asian. So South Asian is a generic term for anybody that comes from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka. So those who are growing up in those countries and also the diaspora that's migrated. So I am from India. I spent most of my adult life in India. I moved to the UK about 18 years ago. So I think of myself as Indian and British and whatever else gets added to that mix. Very traditional family. I was the first girl in my family to go to university. I was the first girl in my family to get a job. I grew up in a quite a poor family. We were like from the slums of Mumbai. So I don't know if you've seen things like Slumdog Millionaire. Like, that's kind of where I'm from. And in terms of the culture, my relationship with my culture was very difficult one because I was told that as a girl, the only available options or choices to me were to marry somebody who would look after me and be nice to me. And that was it. Like that was the extent of the ambition that I was allowed. And
Mm.
I kind of grew up really questioning. I don't even know where it comes from. People always ask me, like, where does the activism come from? I think I was just born with it. And I was challenging my family from a very young age to say, I don't like this. Why are you telling me this? Like, so much. My God, I can't. We could do a whole 3 hours on this. It would be like, girls should behave like this. Girls' voices should be like this. You can't talk too loudly. You can't walk too loudly. You can't say anything in a public gathering. You've got to be polite to all your elders. You've got to blah blah blah. You've got to learn to cook. You've got to dress modestly. There's a million rules, and I broke every one of them. So so it didn't go down too well with the family, but I feel like it was an important part of me becoming who I've become. And now kind of the relationship I have with my culture is a very different one, in that I feel like I've taken the bits of the culture that suit me, that work for me as the woman that I am, and I have said no to the other bits of the culture that do not work for me. And I think it's such an old historic culture. Like traditionally, if you look back, we go back thousands and thousands of years. There is so much good and there's so much feminism and female power and Shakti within the culture that I think patriarchy's kind of made us forget about. So I'm reclaiming that. That's my relationship with South Asian culture today.
That's incredible. And can I ask how old you were when you came to the UK?
So 18 years ago, what was I kind of? So I'm 50 now. I've just turned 50 this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I feel like it's an amazing age. And that's another thing I want to talk
It
to you about, like
is.
ageism. Like it's really, really important. So I guess I was my maths is really bad. So not quite 40 yet. So I was like 30 something, I think, when I moved.
Okay, so you were an
18
adult and
years. I was yeah,
you
all
were
my
freshly a
formative
study
years.
before you
Yeah,
came to the Western world where
yeah,
feminism is more
yeah,
prevalent and things like
yeah,
that. So
yeah, yeah.
you were feminist before feminism was feminism.
I didn't know the word feminism, Lori. Like
What
I
did you
talk
call
about
it? You
this.
just called it
I didn't know it
reform.
was just me being me,
Yeah.
Sangeeta being Sangeeta. Like I didn't
Mhm.
know there was such a concept as feminism because India in the 80s was very limited. We had like two magazines, two TV channels. Nobody
Mhm.
talked about these things, and the world was just exactly how it was. So I only learned about the word feminism in my 30s, I think. And I'm like, oh my God, that's what I've always been. I've been a feminist, except I didn't know it was that word existed.
Do you have a memory of something that, like something in particular that you fought really actively against when you were a kid or growing up?
Yeah, I guess one of the most important fights that I've led in my life is the fight to not be married off. So, a lot of girls in South Asian culture, even now, will say yes to an arranged marriage, and for some people it works. For me, I knew it wouldn't.
Mm,
So it starts very early. Like your parents will say, "Oh, if you do this, your husband's not going to like you. If you don't do that, your mother-in-law is going to hate you." So, that whole kind of prep of like our whole purpose is for this marriage and this man and this his family starts very, very early in my culture.
mm,
So I started very young to say, but why should that be? For example, I had this dream of like traveling around the world. And for someone like me, like we were so poor, it was like this impossible dream that would never happen. And I talked to my mother and say, one day I'd love to have enough money to go to Europe and to go to America and things like that. And my mother would say, "Oh, well, you just have to find a husband who has a job who allows him to travel then." Because that was the extent of ambition for girls. So
mm.
I started pushing back at this idea of marriage from the age of 18. And those days, like people, the CVs of men would appear. Like, I don't know why you wanted a CV. Like, it was not like applying for a job or something. Um, but the CVs would appear on the desk, and I would say, "No, no, no, I'm not doing any of this."
Hold
And
up, hold up. You're talking about CDs?
CVs, like
Oh,
curriculum vitae,
CDs.
like, when you apply for a job, how you
So it
put
was
in your
applying
like
for a husband?
husband position in my life. And I'm like, sorry, husband position in my life, the role doesn't exist. So, so yeah, as soon as I walked home from work, on the kitchen table in my home, these kind of CVs or biodatas, as they're called in India, would pile up. And I would say, "No, I'm not interested. I'm not interested. I'm not interested." And it became so bad that the neighbors would ask my mother, "Oh, what's happening? What's wrong with your daughter? She's not getting married. There must be something wrong with her." So my mother allowed this guy to come home without telling me, right? This man turned up. And I was so angry that they'd ignored me that I came out in my pajamas. So I was in the other room, and traditionally girls wear their saris and they wear jewelry and they
Yeah.
wear all this beautiful stuff, right? And I came out in my pajamas because in my head I'm like, "Well, I'll show you. You want to get married to me? Like, you better be ready to deal with this." So I think that was my big rebellion at that time. So I remember that as a big, big, big thing that I fought against from the age of probably 15, 16 till the time I left home when I was 29, which is very, very old.
Mm.
Like in India in that time, girls didn't leave home. So there's a saying that either your bridal procession leaves your house or your funeral procession leaves your house as a woman.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's a little bit of the culture that I come from.
And when you came to the UK, you were already an adult, and was there
Yeah.
anything that kind of shocked you and maybe, I don't know, either maybe validated your feelings from before?
Yeah, so much actually. And coming to the UK was amazing because here I could build myself. I could become the person that I was meant to be, right? Nobody would tell you you can't do this or can't wear that or can't whatever. So that was great. But what really surprised me is with the work I do, I work with a lot of South Asian women because they are the ones who listen to my podcast or come to my workshops or events. This cultural conditioning is so deeply embedded, like women who are lawyers and making millions of pounds will still go by the same kind of cultural codes. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter who you are. Are you married? Have you got children? Have you got a family? These are the kind of things. And that's so deeply embedded in our collective consciousness as women, I think, that we don't even realize we're doing it. So that
Yeah.
really surprised me. So on the outside, it's such a liberal society. You can be who you want to be. You can have sex with as many people as you want. You don't have to get married. You can do whatever you like, right? It's a very liberal society. But even within that, within the South Asian women that I'm speaking to, I see the same conditioning that I have in my own kind of 1980s India, very, very traditional setup. So on the
Mm.
outside, it doesn't matter how modern or evolved you are. On the inside, in our own heads, it's the same code that's running. And you have to, like, as a South Asian woman, and I'm sure it's the same in your culture,
Mm.
consciously stand up and say, "Ah, Why am I thinking this? Why am I saying this? Why am I feeling this? Because that's been taught to me by my family and their parents, and their parents is very, very old. Does this serve me? Is the question I always ask myself. And I've got this voice still, in my head. I'm like, oh my God. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, all these people have families and I don't have a family. And I'm like, okay, so where's that voice coming from? That's my mother's voice. It's her mother's voice. It's her grandmother's voice. And
Hmm.
then start to really question, like, is that really me? And sometimes, like, no, that's not me. So, that's where the learning is.
That's incredible. I think it's so interesting that you've also been able to create dialogue around it, because so much of what happens in our communities that are related to cultural traditions like that, it just, you don't end up talking about it. You just do it. There's no
Yes,
questioning.
yes,
You
yes,
get married, you have kids, you have a
yes,
family, you're going to
yes,
be the one that does all the
yes,
dishes and, takes
yes,
care of the
yes,
babies, and no one is going to, be
yes,
there for you because that's your role as a woman and that's it.
yes, yes,
Um, and egalitarian society is something that we would hope for, and that,
yes,
a parent partnership could be more equal, but
yeah,
it never is.
yeah,
And so
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you end up in the same place as your parents, which was not necessarily the best place. So I think it's so fascinating that we have come to a point in our culture, I think, even just no matter where you are in the world, where the daughters of immigrants or immigrants themselves, they've gotten to this point where they're actually having this discourse, and we have spaces for it. So we have these podcasts, and we have this room to grow and communicate. So I'd love to hear about, how you've grown your show and your network, and maybe an anecdote if you can share, from your listeners, because I'm sure you've connected with so many women that have had this experience of questioning, and it's something that we're aiming to do with our show as well. And so I would love to hear about the way that you've interacted with your listeners about the same topics.
Absolutely. Before I start, I want to show you my necklace. This says bad beti, which is bad
Okay.
daughter in Hindi.
Oh,
And
wow.
I proudly claim this because we're told as South Asian women that we have to be good daughters all the time. A good daughter does this. A good daughter doesn't answer back. A
Mm.
good daughter gets married. A good daughter has children. There's so many things, right? So by claiming that I'm a bad daughter, I am standing up for all the bad daughters in the world. And it doesn't mean you're a bad daughter as in you're disrespectful to your parents, but it just means somebody who follows their own voice and their own heart, right?
Mm.
And I say this because this is a key part of how I've grown the show and the community. So Masala Podcast started 4.5 years ago, as an idea in my head, and I was running workshops for South Asian women. I was teaching them on how to talk about taboos in the culture. So all the work I do is around sex, periods, mental health, all the shit we're not allowed to talk about. You're not allowed to talk about this, so I'm going to
Mm.
talk about it, right? So that's kind of what I started doing. And then I was after a bigger medium to talk to because I could really see it resonating with my community,
Mm.
and happened to find podcasting, as in, like, I'd never heard of the word, I didn't know what a podcast was. And I talk about, say, I went into Google typing, what is a podcast? I don't really know what a podcast is. And then someone sent me a competition from Spotify who were trying to find more women of color podcasters.
Mm.
And I sent a pitch, 3-line pitch, I still remember, without ever thinking that they'd ever get back to me. I heard back, I got a call the next week. Then I got put into the podcasting boot camp for women of color. I won that competition, got a bit of money, and that's how Masala Podcast started. And it started with kind of me really not knowing anything. I'm not from the audio industry. I'm not a podcaster. I don't know anybody at the BBC, which is what a lot of British media is. Unfortunately, even today, you've got to go to the right schools and have the right accent, and so a lot of it was just trusting that what I had to say had a lot of value,
Mm.
trusting that what I had to say would resonate with my audience, my sisters, my South Asian sisters. And so it was just kind of like almost jumping off the plane with the parachute, hoping that the parachute opens. So it was a little bit like that.
Mm.
So season one happened, and I interviewed, and it all happened very, very intuitively and organically. I didn't sit down and think, right, what's the vision for the show? It was just like, I want to talk to women from my culture. I want to talk about these taboos, and I want to share my own personal experiences. So each episode, I will interview a South Asian woman who works in that space, For example, mental health, say a therapist who's a South Asian therapist, or somebody who works in the sexuality space. And then I talk about my experiences growing up in India, coming to the UK, navigating these two cultures,
Hmm.
learning how to balance like which bits of me are what. And that's the kind of essence of the podcast. And I think because I'm very open and honest, I talk about having a nervous breakdown, I talk about crying, I talk about all sorts of things that are very vulnerable on the podcast. So I think women hear me and they say, oh, wow, I feel that too. I recognize that.
Hmm.
And that's how I managed to build the audience very organically, very intuitively, very without any of the. I used to work in marketing, but there's no marketing speak here. It's just literally talking to them,
Hmm.
authentic, real, vulnerable way, which they hear. And you can't lie on audio. People can hear you. So if you're real, people pick up. People know you. And slowly over, I've done 4 seasons now, 42 episodes. I've covered all sorts of topics from mental health to porn to sex to coming out as queer to, you know, all sorts of things to mental health to sexual abuse, a lot of stuff. And the way, if you ask me, is there a method or a secret, is just by being authentic,
Hmm.
by talking to my audience. Every time somebody messages me, I will reply. And the response has been like, I feel blessed when I say this to you. Like almost every day, every other day, I get a message or an email or a DM, or people will find out who I am and write to me. And the messages are stuff like, thanks to you, I feel less alone in the world.
Hmm.
Or thanks to you, I've kind of made peace with my culture a little bit more, or I feel more connected to it. I have women from India, like 18-year-olds from India, finding me and writing to me. I've got British women, I've got American women, I've got, like it's just crazy. And one of the most beautiful stories was recently, the most recent one was I was in India traveling, and I go back every couple of, like, for a couple of months every year. This girl wrote to me on Instagram. She said, oh, are you in my city? Because she could see where I was, Kochi, which is in the south of India. And I said, yes. And she said, oh, I would love to meet you for a coffee because I'm a huge fan of Masala Podcast. So we met and she sat across the table and she said, I love your podcast and it's really changed my life. And I'm like, that's quite big. And she said, I was married off, I had an arranged marriage to this guy and he was gay, but he was too scared to come out to his family. Family married him off thinking marriage will fix it, which happens in our culture a lot. And he refused to kind of have sex with her or have any relationship with her. She went to his family and said, look, this is what's happening. And they said, well, that's your fault. You obviously can't keep him. He then got so stressed that he forced himself on her. She got pregnant. She lost the baby. So there was a lot of trauma. And she said, all through it, I kept listening to your podcast. I listened to the same episodes over and over again. And one day I walked out. Isn't that incredible? I just sat there, had tears in my eyes.
Wow.
And it was incredible. So to me, like, that's why I do this.
Hmm.
And I say this to people, like, I will do this till my dying breath. If there's no money, I'll do this. I'll find a way to make it happen. I will, whatever it takes is what I will do to keep this podcast going, because it's that important to the women in my community, to me also, and also to the women in my community. So this is there's no kind of secret sauce or recipe for how I've grown it. It's just, this is how it's happened for me.
That's incredible. I'm I mean, bravo for that. It's something that blows you away when you hear stories like that. I'm curious, what is the most taboo topic that you've ever talked about on the show?
I would have to say I'd interviewed a South Asian porn star, right? She's a Muslim South Asian porn star. And it's quite some of the topics are quite serious that I do, but this one was quite fun and funny because she talks about she's on one of those chat lines, the ones you have, like the sex lines. She was on it, and the call that came through was her mother, who didn't know she was a porn star. And she's like, cut the call, cut the call.
Oh my gosh.
So that's really funny. So the other funny bit in that interview, it's if anyone's listening, you just look for porn. I think it's in season 2 or season 3, I forget. Anyway, so Sahara Knight, who's my guest on the show, talks about, she's also a sex worker. So she talks about one of her clients being he's a priest, and he has a thing for carrots. I will not say more. You got to listen to the episode. There's a carrot and an imam on that episode.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy! I can't believe that you had this person who said that their client was a priest.
So that's probably one of the most taboo episodes, I guess.
That's incredible. All right, so we're going to come to the end of this. So I would love to hear something about your family. So a lot of the time, as daughters of immigrants, people who inspired us the most are people in our families. Is there anyone that you connected with a lot growing up?
Actually, I'm sorry to say, my family, I have quite a difficult relationship with them, and my journey has been to make a life outside of my family. So I have had zero family kind of support or love or anything. And to form my identity, I had to come away. And my people ask what my inspiration is. My inspiration is myself. Like, nobody mentored me, nobody inspired me, nobody did any of those things. I had to do it all for myself. So the answer to your question is no, there is nobody in my family that inspired me.
That's interesting. I think one of the people that I've interviewed in the past, they said that they think of themselves as being the roots, so that
I
they don't feel that disconnect. If they don't have a relationship with their family, they are the roots. They are
Yeah,
the
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
connection.
And you have to become your own roots. And I think
Mm.
this is the important. It's really hard. There's a lot of pain. I'm smiling and I'm talking to you, but there's been a lot of pain in my life. But I've had to learn to be my own family, to be my own roots, to be my own support system, because that's the only person you can rely on 100%. You come into this world alone and you die alone. And you have to have that relationship with yourself has to be the strongest relationship you can make it.
It's beautiful. I want to ask you if you could share an anecdote that represents a cultural kind of the blends that you live in every day. If you can share a moment.
There's a
Yeah.
lot. There's a lot. So I, like I was saying to you, like I'm Indian first, then I've become British, and now those parts of my identity are kind of mixed. And I love that. And I feel like I was never entirely comfortable just being Indian either. So, this kind of melange of cultures really, really suits me. So I'll, like whether it's cooking, like last night I was watching Country Files, which is such a British thing to do on a Sunday afternoon. It's people going up hills and looking at sheep and farming and, making scones and drinking tea. And at the same time, I'm making my Kerala fish curry in my kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. And, it's like, I love the food of my culture. Like, I don't know if it's the same for you. Like, Indians get very excited. So I've got
Yeah.
this like very specific Kerala fish curry recipe, which has coconut, which has turmeric, coconut, coriander, and I blend it and I put tamarind, which is a very, very Kerala ingredient as well. And I'm cooking it and I'm watching Country File yesterday. And it's like one of those, like, I kind of chuckled to myself and I said, my God, I love my life.
That's a perfect moment. Yeah. I love that. So just to wrap up the interview, I'm going to ask you some quick
Yeah,
questions,
sure.
and you can just answer as naturally as you find it. Um, don't think too much. Okay.
Okay.
So first one is, what language do you swear in when you touch a hot plate?
Hindi. Oh, funny enough, sometimes Hindi, sometimes English.
Okay.
So
What's
I
your
think,
favorite food?
ooh, what I said, prawn curry, Kerala prawn curry, and
Wonderful.
rice and red rice.
Oh, that sounds delicious. I want to come over for dinner next time I'm in
Please do.
London.
I'll cook for you.
Please. Yeah,
Please
wonderful. All right. So what is a song that you've had in your head this week?
do. uh, Megan Trainor. Um, I look good in my Versace dress. Na, 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 what
The
is it?
TikTok one? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Uh,
she's been in charge of
yes,
many
yes,
TikTok
yes. And I love
memes.
it
Yeah.
because it's all about, like, I could come out in my, jammies and I'd still look good is the message. So I
It's
keep playing it to myself. Like, I
yeah,
don't care about it's not the Versace dress. It's me that's fucking hot is the
yeah.
message
It's
which I
giving
love.
Sangeeta in her pajamas coming out and saying, "I
Yeah,
don't want to marry you" to the guy.
exactly. Exactly. That's it.
I love that. What's your last Google search that you are comfortable sharing?
Ooh, I won't share the dodgy ones. But I think I was looking. What was I looking for yesterday? This is going to sound so domestic, right? Blackout curtains for my windows because the sun is really high right now. So I
Yeah,
wake up like I love the sunshine, but at 4 in the morning it wakes me up. So I look for blackout curtains on Google.
very nice. And finally, what is your most embarrassing dream? Take it as you will, that question.
Do we all have sex dreams about our friends? I don't know. I always have like, and I don't fancy them, but somehow like I don't know, in some like compromising position with a friend in my dreams. I don't know what that is.
Okay.
Probably not. It's just me. I probably need
And
like some therapy for that.
and we'll close with that. Thank you so much for your time, Sangeeta. Tell us where we can find you and where we can find your show.
So if you Google Masala Podcast, you can find me on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I'm also on Instagram and Twitter as Soul Sutras, SOULSUTRAS. And that's also the name of my website, soulsutras.co.uk. And Masala Podcast, like Google me and you'll find me and come say hello.
Amazing. And one last question. Can you give us advice to Mijas who are scared to take the leap and start kind of being their most authentic selves? What would you give them as an advice?
So my advice would be to start small. So when we take big, scary steps, it's terrifying. But think of that big step as 100 little steps. So whether that's next time someone says something that you don't feel comfortable with, piping up and saying, actually, you know what, that makes me uncomfortable. Asking for something you need in your life with your family, with your partner. When you're like, oh, can I ask? Ask, you know? So small, lots of mini steps. And then before you know it, you've got a revolution.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sangeeta. This has been so much fun.